Hi, in this lesson we're going to get into licensing of brokers and salespeople. So let's first talk a little bit about the police power. The police power, which is one of the 4 government limitations on ownership, and you might remember that from another lesson. The 4 government limitations on ownership can be remembered by the acronym PETE, P-E-T-E, are police power, eminent domain, taxation, and escheat. So the police power, if you recall, is the right of the government to enact laws for the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And it's felt that a real estate license is needed in order to protect the public. Remember, real estate agents are handling the largest single financial transaction that people normally get involved with. So the police power basically is the state's authority to require us as real estate agents to become licensed. So let's first talk about the real estate broker, because the real estate broker in Arizona is the hub of a real estate transaction. As a salesperson, if you are a salesperson, you're working for a broker. So the real estate broker, by definition, is someone who performs real estate services for another and for compensation. So for example, if you wanted to buy and sell property on your own just for yourself, you do not need to have a real estate license. But if you're working for helping somebody else buy, sell, lease, or rent, or even auction property, you need to be a real estate broker or be a licensed salesperson working for a broker. And of course, for compensation. So I guess if you wanted to work for everybody for free, you wouldn't need a broker's license. But that's pretty rare and pretty unusual that somebody would want to do that. So the broker's license is the license that is required for someone who wants to be a real estate broker, and that includes a number of different types of brokers. Remember that the client is the one who hires the broker. So the relationship, the contractual relationship, exists between the client, that could be the seller, the buyer, the landlord, or the tenant, and the real estate broker. So if you're a real estate salesperson, you do not have any direct contractual relationship with the client. Your relationship, as we'll see, with the client is through the real estate broker. So let's talk a little bit about the types of brokers. First is what's known as a sole proprietor broker. I'm a sole proprietor broker. I do not run a real estate company. I did, when I first got into real estate, sell and list real estate. But when I opened our school, I decided not to continue to sell because I did not want to be in competition with the people who would hopefully refer business to us. So I retain and maintain my broker's license, but as a sole proprietor. In other words, I'm not incorporated. I'm not an LLC. And if I were to go out and list and sell real estate, I probably would create an entity in order to have some limited liability. But as it stands, I'm a sole proprietor broker. I do not recommend to brokers who are brokering real estate, listing, helping buyers buy, leasing, and renting real estate, to be sole proprietors. They should create an entity such as an LLC or a corporation to limit their liability. The next type of broker is the designated broker. In other words, the principal or managing broker of either a corporation, a partnership, or a limited liability company. So most real estate companies are either corporations or limited liability companies, and a license is granted by the real estate department to that limited liability company, let's say, and a person, the designated broker, manages that particular and runs that particular company. The other type of broker is an associate broker. An associate broker is someone who has a broker's license and is licensed to a company, but they are not the designated or principal broker of that firm. So what are the requirements for a broker's license? Basically, there are 3 main ones. A broker has to have 3 years experience within the previous 5 years as a licensed salesperson or broker in Arizona or another state. So a broker or salesperson who's licensed in another state can come into Arizona and immediately obtain their broker's license once they go through the education and pass the examination. A broker has to take a 90-hour pre-licensing course of study, and they have to pass a school final exam and a state examination. And there are rules in the statutes for places of business for brokers. A broker must have a physical place of business here in Arizona. Now that can be, and many brokers actually do, work out of their home. But they can't just have a P.O. box, for example. Now, of course, they may have a P.O. box, but it can't just be a post office box. It can't be just a website. Of course, all brokers would typically have a website of some sort, but they can't just run a brokerage business as a website. So a broker must have a definite physical place of business here in Arizona. And they must notify the real estate commissioner and the real estate department of any change in business location. If they fail to notify the commissioner of change of their business location, then their license is automatically canceled. Also, if they do change business locations, they're supposed to remove their sign immediately. Now, they have to have a sign at their place of business, at the entrance of their place of business, and the sign at a minimum has to have the name of the company and the broker. So there's ABC Realty, Sal Manella, good friend of mine, as the broker. Now, if it's a branch office, then it would also have to say branch office on the sign where people enter the place of business. Now, there is an exception to this for someone who is working out of their home. And I won't go into the details right here, but if someone is a one-person brokerage operation working out of their home, they are not required to have a sign at the entrance to their place of business. Now, branch offices, if a brokerage firm has branch offices, may be managed by either a broker or a salesperson. As I mentioned, a separate branch office license is needed. So most of the large brokerage firms that have branch offices have a broker as a manager. Why? Because that broker can be given what's called delegated authority to be able to review and initial contracts and to hire and fire licensees. If a salesperson is the branch manager of a branch office, that salesperson cannot be given authority to review and initial contracts or to hire or fire licensees. So most brokerage firms, if they have a branch office, have another broker, an associate broker, managing that office. Now, what about the broker's license? Well, the broker's license has to be displayed in the office. Now, years ago, all salespersons and the broker's license would have to be displayed. But today, that's not necessary. However, the broker's license must be displayed prominently in the office. So any consumer walking into the broker's office can see that they are licensed. Now, the last thing we want to talk about here relative to brokers is what's called the broker unable to act, sometimes referred to as a broker's temporary absence. Now, make a note for yourself, this is not a temporary license. This is just when the broker is going on a vacation or a trip and does not want to or cannot act on behalf of his or her clients, on behalf of the company. So what the statute says is that if a broker is unable to act for more than 24 hours, that the broker has to appoint a licensee in the company or another designated broker to act in his or her place. So what does that mean? Well, if the brokerage firm has salespeople who work with the company, the broker can simply appoint one of the salespeople to act while the broker is absent. If the broker is a one-person operation, however, the broker would then have to appoint a designated broker from another company to act while the broker is out of town and unable to act. Now let's talk about this out-of-town business. With today's technology, brokers can be pretty much anywhere in the world and be able to conduct the business of the company through email, through other technological means. So just because a broker is not present in the office and might be on vacation even, that broker may not have to appoint somebody. But for example, let's say the broker was going on a rafting trip down the Colorado River for 10 days. In that circumstance, the broker is totally incommunicado, and in order to make sure that the clients of the company are served, the broker is going to have to appoint somebody else in their stead while they're unable to act. Now, this authorization cannot be for an indefinite period of time. It cannot exceed 30 days. So if a broker was really going on, let's say, an extended vacation for 2 or 3 months, the broker would actually have to hire or replace himself or herself with another designated broker. So that again is the statute dealing with what's called a broker's temporary absence, or when a broker is unable to act. And I don't want you to confuse this with what's called a broker's temporary license, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So now let's talk about the salesperson's license, a real estate salesperson. The requirements for a salesperson's license is that the person be a minimum of 18 years of age, that they take a 90-hour pre-licensing course, and they also pass an examination at the school and the state examination. Now, a salesperson must be licensed to a licensed broker in order to conduct real estate activities. So now let's talk about active versus inactive status. An active licensee is one who is working with a broker. An inactive licensee is someone who is no longer with or has never activated their license with a brokerage firm. For example, when a person passes their real estate examination and then pays their fees to the real estate department, at that moment they are licensed on inactive status. In the next moment, if a brokerage firm clicks a link and hires that salesperson, their license is now on active status. Let's say that a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, that the salesperson decides that he or she no longer wants to work for that broker or work in the business, they can be severed by the broker and place their license on inactive status. So a person can only work in the real estate profession if their license is active with a broker. If they're inactive, their license is on hold, so to speak. But they can renew their license every 2 years while on active or inactive status. They still have to take all of their continuing education and pay their fees, whether they are active or inactive. Now, a salesperson's license is held by the broker. Now, years ago, it used to be that we would have to have all the salesperson's licenses displayed in the office on the wall. Well, that went away quite a few years ago, and now as long as the salesperson's license is available for view online, in other words, through the real estate department's database, or there's a hard copy, a printed copy in the broker's file somewhere, that's all that's required. And please keep in mind that the salesperson always represents the broker. The salesperson does nothing on his own or her own. So if we look at the hierarchy here, the client, that's the buyer, the seller, the landlord, or the tenant, hires the broker in the brokerage firm. Even though they're dealing directly with the salesperson, their contract is with the broker. And everything the salesperson does is done through the broker. So the salesperson represents the client, but through the brokerage firm. To hire or fire a real estate agent, there's a hire and sever form, and it's actually one form that serves both purposes if you visualize a paper network of real estate forms. Actually, in today's marketplace, with the Department of Real Estate's website, salespersons are normally hired electronically and severed electronically. So this form, if you want to call it a form, hires the salesperson, and the sever form terminates the salesperson. Now, at the time that salesperson is severed, their license has to be returned to the real estate department. Well, is there really a paper license? Well, years ago there used to be, and the statutes say that the license has to be returned. Today, through electronic means, the license is simply severed by clicking a link on the Department of Real Estate's website through their online services. You should also know that a salesperson or associate broker can sever themselves from a broker. So a broker does not have to be the one who clicks the link to sever a licensee. The salesperson or associate broker can also, on their own, terminate their relationship with the broker. I'd like you to keep in mind that either the hire or fire is effective only when received by the Department of Real Estate. So if we visualize a world of paper again, a broker might sign a sever form today, but for some reason not turn it into the Department of Real Estate for a week or so. Well, all during that week, that salesperson is still licensed to that broker, because it's not until the real estate department receives notice of that termination or the hiring that that person is terminated or hired by that broker. You'll see a couple of questions about this on some of your quizzes.